It's not even the offseason yet, and the New Orleans Saints Sean Payton trade cycle news just continues to get crazier and crazier. We got all of that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode brought to you by Bet Online, where they've got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. Go and check them out today, betonline.net, where the game starts. On today's episode, we're taking a look at three major pieces of news around the New Orleans Saints. We're going to discuss as well what the New Orleans Saints need to do to beat the Carolina Panthers this weekend, which is simply put Sam Darnold in a bad spot, and the Saints offense should be able to do that. We'll break that down. Alontae Taylor, not yet confirmed to be the starter opposite Marshon Lattimore, but we know Paulson Adebo's not playing this weekend. New Orleans Saints cornerback who started last week. It's time for Alontae Taylor to be CB2. And first, we're going to start off with this Sean Payton trade cycle as it gets kind of crazier and crazier every time that we meet to discuss about it. So let's break down what's the newest development in the potential Sean Payton trade this offseason. I do want to happily report great news going on around Damar Hamlin right now, talking to his family, talking to his caregivers, FaceTimed with the Buffalo Bills during a team meeting. So just really, really cool to see that there's still a long road ahead, all of that, but that he is doing well and like neurologically intact, which I think was one of the biggest key concerns going into all this. So just so cool. And thank you to everybody for everything you did and helping, in sending your positive vibes, your prayers, your thoughts, all of that, because all that makes a difference, if you ask me. So let's discuss now this new Sean Payton wrinkle, right? So it's not really anything to do with Sean Payton, but it's something to do with a potential landing spot for Sean Payton. There's some reports out there that the Miami Dolphins would foolishly move on from head coach Mike McDaniel if the Dolphins miss the playoffs this weekend. And that, to me, is absolutely insane. We've spoken a bunch of times over the course of this show about how bad a move it would be for the New Orleans Saints to, without full-on understanding or without full-on reason, move on from Dennis Allen after a year. It's a bad look on any organization that moves on from a first-year head coach after their first year, unless there are extenuating circumstances. Nathaniel Hackett was absolute garbage as a head coach in Denver. That didn't work. That's not who Dennis Allen was for the New Orleans Saints. Urban Meyer was just a garbage person. That ended up with him being let go during his first year or after his first year, whatever it was. And then we've only seen it 3 other times. And so for the New Orleans Saints, move on from Dennis Allen, it wouldn't make sense. For the Miami Dolphins to move on from Mike McDaniel after 1 year, it doesn't make, I dare say, even more sense. It's more confusing. The guy's one of the most foremost offensive minds in the NFL. So why would the Miami Dolphins do this? Well, you remember the Miami Dolphins got in a lot of trouble over the course of the offseason. Why? Because they were tampering with Sean Payton and Tom Brady. Sean Payton could potentially be traded this offseason to another team. The Miami Dolphins clearly see that as an opportunity. So if you see what's happening here, it's a little questionable, right? I wouldn't do this if I was Miami because it's just a bad choice. Mike McDaniel's a dang good head coach, you know what I mean? And so here's what a lot of people have kind of been theorizing is, what if the New Orleans Saints were to trade Sean Payton to Miami, and that trade were to bring Mike McDaniel to New Orleans? Now, many of you know I was a big advocate for Mike McDaniel to New Orleans last offseason. As far as I remember, he didn't even interview with the New Orleans Saints. I don't know if that's because he was already locked in with Miami or if it was because he didn't want to interview with New Orleans, or maybe New Orleans didn't call him, one of the two. But they spoke with Brian Flores, they spoke with Eric Bieniemy, they spoke with a bunch of folks. And so, but they didn't speak with Mike McDaniel. So I don't know that this is really the trade that I could see happening. And I don't even know if you can trade a coach for a coach, if I'm being completely honest with you. I'm so kind of confused on what you can and can't trade in those. I don't know if it's only draft capital and some cash consideration, or if you can legitimately trade a coach for a coach. It would certainly be the first time we've seen it in the NFL, to my recollection, and as far as Google's recollection. But the way that I look at it is that trading Sean Payton to get Mike McDaniel as a head coach doesn't make sense for the New Orleans Saints. As much as I wanted Mike McDaniel to be the head coach for the New Orleans Saints, but doing that is the same thing as moving on from Dennis Allen after potentially closing out the season 4-0, 5-2 over the last 7. It would still be a bad look on New Orleans. Now, if there was some world in which you trade Sean Payton to the Miami Dolphins and then you can hire Mike McDaniel as your offensive coordinator, sign me the F up. I am there 100%. Because again, that's a foremost guy when it comes to offensive innovation in the NFL. Mike McDaniel is one of those guys that is the reason that the NFL is heading in the direction that it's heading, all the way from like play writers becoming more and more popular within NFL hiring cycles, to the fact that he is running sort of that Shanahan spread offense that is at the forefront of the NFL and where it's headed right now, to being able to build a system that works for non-mobile and mobile quarterbacks. Look what Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance, having both of those guys in that offense and building something that they were both able to operate within, or ideally would have been able to operate within, knowing that Dennis Allen wanted to go the mobile quarterback route before the season, but also a passer that could attack all three levels, knowing that that talent is available in this year's draft, and not just one, not just two, but several quarterback candidates that would be in range of the New Orleans Saints drafting in the second and third rounds. All of that makes a ton of sense to me. To me, that's a marriage made in heaven. But is that possible, right? Can you trade a coach for another coach and then change that coach into an offensive coordinator? I don't know. But if you want to now, if the Miami Dolphins are foolish enough, this egregiously selfish move of potentially moving on from Mike McDaniel after missing the playoffs after 1 year as the head coach, understanding everything that he brought to that team, then sure, you could trade Sean Payton to the Miami Dolphins. But if I'm the New Orleans Saints, I'm calling up Mike McDaniel and I'm saying, look, we're going to do this, but part of this is we want you as the offensive coordinator in New Orleans. I think Mike McDaniel should be a head coach. But usually when something like that happens and you get, your first run and it doesn't work out, then you usually go back to coordinator and then work yourself back up to head coach again. That's what happened with Dennis Allen. So I could see the Saints doing something like that. And I think that would be amazing. The issue, though, is Miami Dolphins don't have a first round pick in 2023. So what are you trading? What are you getting back in your trade for Sean Payton? Are you comfortable trading Sean Payton to a team where a 2023 second round pick is going to be the cornerstone of the trade? I don't know. I don't know if that's enough. Now, the Miami Dolphins had to surrender a first round pick this year. They also had to forfeit a third round pick in 2024. So they still have their first round pick in 2024. So do you feel okay with getting a second round pick and a third round pick this year? The Dolphins also have 2 third round picks this year. So maybe you get them to come up out of both of those. But if you can get a second round pick and a third round pick this year, and then a first round pick and some other considerations for next year and some other capital for next year, is that enough for you to feel comfortable trading Sean Payton? It doesn't get you into the first round this year, but it gives you the fodder to get there if you needed to. It gives you basically it gives you everything that the Baltimore Ravens needed a couple of years ago to trade into pick 32 and draft Lamar Jackson. So there's still sort of those things that you could do by getting an extra second and an extra third this year. But is that really what you want? And what are you going to get from other teams? Really, the bidding war is kind of the most important part of all this. But if you were to do that and trade Sean Payton for a second, a third, a first for next year, and some considerations, it could be worth it. I don't think it's enough. It could be worth it, though. The team could, the market is going to set the market for Payton. But if the Saints could then get Mike McDaniel as their offensive coordinator, then I think that's even more valuable, because then you have the perfect person in position to help you recreate, or I don't want to say recreate, but reload your offense. He's a guy that people would want to come and play for. It's a scheme that people would want to come to be a part of. And it's a scheme that would be able to support a veteran quarterback and a young quarterback to where you can develop one while getting mentorship from the other. He'd evolve the Saints offense along with the way that the NFL is moving and something that would fit any quarterback style. So I think that is the reason that the New Orleans Saints would consider this. But getting Mike McDaniel as your offensive coordinator is absolutely no guarantee, especially if a job like the Los Angeles Chargers offensive coordinator position opens up. That's a match made in heaven, him and Justin Herbert. So we'll see. We'll see how all of that unfolds. But what a wild situation in Miami, one that I did not expect to see at the end of this season. And ultimately, right, it's just reports. So we'll see if that job even opens up. But if that job opens up, it becomes a prime landing spot for Sean Payton, at least in terms of his desires, considering why the Miami Dolphins got in trouble in the first place. Coming up next, Alontae Taylor deserves the start this weekend. We're going to break down why and what he might be able to do with it, why it's so important as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. Daily fantasy made the way that it should be. It's not you versus somebody else's lineup. It's not you versus some mystery lineups and trying to win a mystery slice of a big old mystery pot. It's none of that. It's you versus the house. You know exactly what you're doing from step one all the way through winning when it comes to Prize Picks, because they bring in a lot of winnings for users. You pick 2 to 5 players, simply choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projections. That's all you got to do. You get them right, you can get up to 10 times your entry back in winnings. And if you're a first-time user, you can get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 simply by using the promo code Locked On. That means you put down $100, they'll match $100. You put down $50, they'll match $50. All you have to do is punch in that promo code Locked On the Prize Picks app or at prizepicks.com today. You get that 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making us your first listen of the day every day. Alontae Taylor deserves the start opposite Marshon Lattimore in this weekend's game with Paulson Adebo out. For your second listen today, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today. Get all the news around the world of sports in around 20-25 minutes. The Locked On local experts. Okay. We've seen some curious personnel decisions by this defense before, and we've seen it happen before to where the Saints have started like Bradley Roby on the outside in place of Alontae Taylor, with Chris Harris starting in the slot. And that has happened at times where Taylor was healthy, where Roby was healthy, and where Harris is healthy. Going into this week, even though Paulson Adebo won't play, Marshon Lattimore should, and it looks like he will, considering he played last week, hasn't been on the injury report at all this week. And now that means you have a healthy Alontae Taylor. It means you have a healthy Bradley Roby, and you have a healthy Chris Harris. The right choice this weekend for the New Orleans Saints is to start Alontae Taylor opposite Marshon Lattimore. This is going to effectively be one of the moments that everyone will remember. Going into the offseason, the final game, everyone is so excited about who Alontae Taylor has turned out to be versus many people's expectations, and they want to see him out on the field. If that doesn't happen this weekend, a lot of people are going to remember that, right? And that's not going to go over very great with the fan base and all this other stuff. So would New Orleans go that route of starting Bradley Roby on the outside again with Chris Harris in the slot and then just leaving Alontae Taylor on the sideline? I don't think that they will. It's hard to believe that they're going to do that, considering that they haven't been starting Roby over Alontae Taylor with Marshon Lattimore out, even though Chris Harris has been healthy. They could have been doing this for the past couple of weeks. Paulson Adebo and Bradley Roby on the outside with Chris Harris in the slot, and they haven't been going that route, and wisely so, because you don't want to keep Alontae Taylor off the field right now because he's playing so incredibly well. So with that being the case, with all of them healthy, they haven't made that decision, so they should retain that decision going into this week. Marshon Lattimore and Alontae Taylor on the outside, Bradley Roby in the slot. Could potentially even see Marcus May back this week. I was highly doubtful that we would see that with the way that he didn't practice on Wednesday, but he was back at practice elevated to limited on Thursday. Could we see Marcus May back for the final game of the season? He would then be in tandem with Tyrann Mathieu at safety. So what does Alontae Taylor have to earn or have to prove in this game? Doesn't really have a lot to prove, right? He has played at an elite level as a corner. He has been targeted amongst some of the highest target rates in terms of snaps per target across the NFL, but he has also held the top 5 lowest, in kind of the lowest categories. He's been a top 5 player in terms of reception percentage allowed, as well as also NFL passer rating when targeted. He's holding them to some of the lowest in the NFL, despite being targeted to some of the highest rates in the NFL. So what this does is that it gives Alontae Taylor an opportunity to finish strong in 2022 and continue to propel himself into the conversation for cornerback 2 next year. The camp battle between Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo was already one that we were kind of watching this past offseason. Bradley Roby had an outstanding training camp, and Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor both had very strong training camps as well. Next year's training camp is going to be so much fun to watch between 29 and 27. Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor. That is going to be so much fun to watch. That's assuming that both are there. I guess there is a world that we should acknowledge in which Alontae Taylor's ascension makes Paulson Adebo, who is a solid NFL corner, a potential trade target for other teams. But and look, every team has a price for every player, right? But I don't think if I'm the Saints, I move Paulson Adebo over the course of this offseason. I think especially with the injury luck or whatever you want to call it, the bad luck that they've had when it comes to injuries over the course of the past couple of seasons, I don't see that just stopping in 2023. Hopefully it gets better, but I don't see that just stopping out of nowhere. And because of that, I think you have to maintain starting quality players at many important positions, including premier positions like cornerback, and that becomes crucial to your success next season. So I don't see a world in which Paulson Adebo gets traded this offseason, but I definitely see a world in which Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo compete like crazy. And this is just the culture of the New Orleans Saints. Marshon Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Bradley Roby, Alontae Taylor have all talked about it. They push each other. There's always competition there. And it's not a situation to where it creates any bad blood or it creates anything other than competition, something that makes each and every one of them better. But for this week, Alontae Taylor absolutely deserves the start this weekend and should be able to end the season on a high note when it comes to an elite rookie year that he's already put together, setting up massive trajectory for 2023. Coming up next, what the New Orleans Saints need to do to beat the Carolina Panthers is pretty simple. They need to force Sam Darnold to do something that always puts him in a bad position. I'll break that down as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And on today's episode, of course, is brought to you by our friends over at Bet Online, your number one source for all of your sports wagering needs. New Orleans Saints currently favored at home in this game. You feeling good about that? Or maybe you want to take a flyer on one of the other games going on around the NFL this week 18, which we weren't sure how things were going to play out here in week 18, but it looks like all systems going for this week. So you want to get on that, you want to get on end of year awards, or maybe you want to pivot away from the NFL for a second and take a look at the NBA, the MLB, the NHL. There's golf, there's auto racing, there's so much that you can find over at Bet Online today. You can find it on your mobile device, your laptop, whatever it is that you use to browse the internet. All you got to do is head over to betonline.net. They've got odds, lines, props, news, scores, and even sports podcasts for you, which is the quickest and fastest way to keep up with everything going on in terms of the trends in action around your betting. You want to check them out? It's Bet Online, where the game starts. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with the biggest key to victory for the New Orleans Saints, the game plan. How do they beat the Carolina Panthers and finish up on a 4-game win streak, winning 5 out of their last 7 games? Well, when it comes down to it, beating the Panthers is going to come down to forcing Sam Darnold to play hero ball. And look, Sam Darnold has had a really, really nice stretch over the course of the past few weeks. He's been awesome under Steve Wilks towards the end of the season. DJ Moore continues to be a big play threat. Laviska Shenault is always a threat with the ball in his hands. And D'Onta Foreman has been running really, really well over the course of this season as well, the Carolina Panthers running back. But their defense has been struggling. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's so many injuries in the secondary. J.C. Horn's done for the rest of the year. Dante Jackson's done for the rest of the year. They've been dealing with some major issues over on the secondary, and in particular at cornerback. So the Saints offense should have no problem putting points on the board in this game against a banged up secondary. And that's going to force Sam Darnold to have to throw the ball in order to stay in the game. So this really comes down to not only the defense doing what it needs to do against Sam Darnold, but the offense doing what it needs to do to put Sam Darnold in a bad position. If they can put Sam Darnold in a position to where he's got to air the ball out and that he's got to play hero ball, he's going to make mistakes. And what we know about Sam Darnold is that when he makes a mistake, when it rains, it pours. And so that's something that the New Orleans Saints should be able to take advantage of, especially with Marshon Lattimore in that equation after coming back and having such a great game against the Philadelphia Eagles last week. Now, we know DJ Moore is good for a 70-yard, this, that, and the other against the Saints every time that they play. That's totally fine. You can give up one of those plays. But as a whole, the New Orleans Saints defense should be able to be a bit of an issue for Sam Darnold, especially if they continue to put him in positions where he has to pass. And I think, here's my bold prediction for the week, Alontae Taylor gets his first interception that counts and stands in this game, especially if Marcus May is able to go this week, which would be huge for the New Orleans Saints to be able to close out the season with basically their entire defense intact. Unfortunately, Paulson Adebo not able to be a part of that equation this week. But getting Marcus May back would effectively help you cap the defense, or cap the offense more accurately, keep them from being able to take those deep shots, right? Those 70-yard shots down to DJ Moore, forcing them to take advantage of patterns, or forcing them to throw to patterns that the New Orleans Saints are prepared for. And so that's why I think Alontae Taylor gets his first interception that stands, that counts in this game. The Saints don't shadow when it comes to corners, meaning that when DJ Moore lines up on one side of the field or the other side of the field, that no matter where he lines up, that the number one receiver is always going to be covered by the number one corner. That's not the case. The Saints play sides. So Marshon Lattimore will always sort of play that right cornerback side, and then, or left cornerback side, left offense, while Alontae Taylor plays the opposite side. And because of that, what that means that Alontae Taylor is going to see every wide receiver matchup imaginable during this game, because Carolina will move their receivers around. And it means that he should see a lot of targets coming his way, especially with Marshon Lattimore playing on the opposite side. This could be a little bit of a different experience for Alontae Taylor in this game. He's used to having Paulson Adebo on the other side, which isn't to say that Paulson Adebo doesn't scare, player or scare quarterbacks from going to his side. And it isn't to say that that Alontae Taylor isn't used to being targeted. Like we mentioned, he's one of the top 5 corners in terms of how frequently he is targeted across the NFL. But with Marshon Lattimore on the other side, Marshon Lattimore absolutely scares quarterbacks away from going towards him, especially in situations where they have to throw in order to get back into the game, which means Alontae Taylor is going to see a lot of attention in this one. So be able to take advantage of that, and that all starts with the offense putting Carolina in position to have to throw in order to stay in the game. A couple of other quick notes here. Cam Jordan has a chance to finish with double-digit sacks with just a 1.5 sack game against Sam Darnold and the Carolina Panthers. Another reason why the Saints offense producing and forcing Carolina to throw makes a big difference, because he and Carl Granderson over on the opposite side will get an opportunity to pin their ears back and go after Sam Darnold. Cam Jordan is going to have a bit of a much more of a matchup against Taylor Moton than he had last week against, backups and all that over at right tackle. But I also am excited to see on the opposite side if Carl Granderson can continue to close out what's been a stellar season for him so far, probably earned himself a lot of money this season, and have another strong performance against a team that has yielded pressures to non-Cam Jordan edge rushers. We saw Peyton Turner with a pair of sacks in previous games. We've seen Carl Granderson have success against the Carolina Panthers offensive line as well. So we've seen all that in addition to Cam Jordan finding his success as well. So they should be able to get their opportunities in the Dome this weekend, that's for sure. And a lot of that is going to come down to the Saints offense producing. Guys like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed getting matchups with players like CJ Henderson, TJ Carey, and Frankie Lavu. I'll take that. I'll take that any day. All right, y'all. I appreciate y'all so much for coming through for another episode of Locked On Saints. Coming up later on today, Jaron Hall, the breakdown I was supposed to get you last night that I couldn't get you. I'm so sorry. We're doing that today for our second episode on Friday. I'm literally going to stop this recording and start that recording. So it'll be coming to you later on in the evening. But I appreciate y'all so much. As always, please enjoy King Cake season, y'all. Carnival season is here. Have a blast with all that. I'm going to be heading over to pick up mine. Hey, I did it for time this time. I looked at my wrist for time. In just a little bit as well before I head over to the Saints training camp facility. So make sure you're keeping up to date with everything going on with your New Orleans Saints here with Locked On Saints, and of course on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day. Make sure you go and check out Locked On Sports today for your second listen. And I appreciate you, as always, making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. And as always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, learn how the family's doing, learn how you living. Let me know how you mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.